So fancy.
A guy on Instagram did it. He did one for me and one for the girls. Their avatars are like $10. I'll send you the link.
Oh, cute. Yeah.
Like I want one for
Hi,
every
Liv.
food at that price.
Hi, Olivia.
Might be muted, Liv. So we can go ahead and get started.
All right.
So I'm a high school counselor at Thomas High School. And I recently was, putting on my Facebook page that I wanted to reach out to students and seniors, especially through this trying time, and just giving them tips so that they can keep going and feel encouraged. There are lots of scholarships still out there, and money to be, money to be applied for, or money to be received, because there's millions of dollars of scholarship that go untouched every year. And so when I put that out there, Asia reached out to me, and she gives really good tips and already helps students with tutoring them and helping them write their essays. So we decided to come together so that we could give tips, and then she could share what she, the knowledge that she has, and I can add in. But we wanted to definitely reach out to our students because we know that it's needed. And then we decided to be specific with, how to share your story, because we know that is the most difficult part sometimes, is when you get to the essay portion where it's, get to the portion of the application where it's writing your essay. Like, okay, well, what do I do? What do I write about? What if I don't have any fancy background? What if I didn't do sports? What if I, my grades aren't that good? Or what if I didn't do community service? What am I going to write about? And so Asia has some really good tips. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself and we'll start. And then if you guys have questions, just make sure you're muted for the most part so we can knock out any background noise. But if you have a question, unmute yourself and just, interrupt and chime in.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Asia Mapp. I am an elementary, 5th and 6th grade school teacher at Fairbanks Elementary. I tutor and I help students either write their essays with reading, writing, comprehension, or obviously depending if you're in college, for parents or adults that need extra assistance, I'll write their papers for them. But as Maya was saying, I'm happy to be here and share some tips. I understand that some students, they do struggle with putting together their essays for scholarships or even their personal statements. So I'd like to go ahead and just share some information on that. I'm going to get ready to share my screen with you in just a moment. One moment. Okay. Okay, and just let me know if you can just kind of see my screen here. Can you see my screen? Got it? Okay. So oftentimes we need to figure out what committees are looking for. So essentially it's about a point in your life that transformed you, or what was your struggle or sacrifice. So a lot of you may think, okay, well, I haven't been through much, or, I don't have a serious struggle story. But the thing is, you don't need a struggle story or something that you've watched in movies or a drama. It can be something that transformed you. So for example, it could be someone that you were very close to, that you depended on, maybe had passed away, right? Maybe you dedicated a large portion of your time into helping someone, and that may have changed your perspective or outlook on how you see things, right? And essentially, this forms a picture for the committee to get a better understanding of who you are, and who's this person that we like to accept in our university, or who's this person that we like to give the scholarship money to. And ultimately, as you're telling the story, it's I'm sorry, can you see this part? Let me move this out the way. Okay. So ultimately, it's how did you deal with that transformation or schedule? So I wrote a few questions that you can think on my left. How has it changed your perspective? How has it transformed you? How did you overcome that difficult time? Or are you still struggling with it? How are you dealing with it? So it's not a matter of, they're expecting you to have this fairy tale story and I made it, this is where I'm at, but more so, what in the story that has given you this newfound perspective, what positive outlook has it given you? So while you're responding, your answer should be insightful, social measure of growth that you've undergone through that particular transformation or struggle, and overall, just the overall positive outlook. You know, again, they're trying to figure out exactly who you are, and by telling your story, you're letting them know that. Okay. So here, this might be familiar to some of you. So this is definitely familiar to me. I use the brainstorm web for my students when they're writing. And brainstorm webs, they're essentially you can use for any given subject. So on a separate piece of paper, you simply brainstorm a few situations in your life, right? Whether that can be, you know, in regards to volunteering, you know, some painstaking area of your life that you went through. You'd simply pick one, you'd write it in the center of this bubble, and you start labeling details or information that may come to mind, and you just start expounding on it. So the first thing that comes to mind, just start writing in these bubbles around it. You can also make extensive bubbles as they're coming around, but this is to help you get your ideas on paper so you don't feel like you're just starting from scratch while you're trying to put together an essay. Essentially, you're going to have a few drafts. You're going to go back and make small edits. But the purpose of this is to get your ideas on paper so you have a roadmap or a web of where you'd like to go. Oops. Let me go back. Sorry about that. Okay. So this is the formula that I use or that I've shown some of my kids. So I like to use the 5 W's or 5 senses when I'm writing my personal statement or scholarship essay. So for 5 W's, who, what, when, where, and why, and our 5 senses, sight, touch, taste, smell, and hear, right? So I took a paragraph from my personal statement. This is the first paragraph of my personal statement that I wrote when I applied to grad school. So I wanted to read that and just kind of break down, give an idea of where I was going with this so you can apply it and maybe just think about where you'd like to go for yours. So in 2014, I realized a life ambition. So for the first time, I was helping children and adults realize their full potential through one-on-one tutoring, all while working at Aristotle Preparatory Academy. Although working with children in the classroom is nice, it was nothing compared to being my own boss outside of my normal work schedule. I realized my strengths and what I enjoyed doing, so I wanted to gather some information on how I could contract my services through the school. So in this example, as I use the 5 W's and 5 senses, right? Here, my first sentence, in 2014, I realized a life ambition for the first time. I'm letting them know I've come to this sense of awareness, right? This self-discovery about myself and who I am, right? And through this, I'm telling a story. I'm giving them when this took place. I give them the year, okay? I'm letting them know what this transformation was, and I'm being specific about what it was I was doing. I was helping children and adults realize their potential through one-on-one tutoring, and I also let them know what I was doing around that time. So I'm giving some a little background information about who I am and what I was doing. I go on to say, although working with children in the classroom was nice, it was nothing compared to being my boss outside the normal classroom schedule. So again, I'm giving them more insight about who I am. I'm letting them know that working with kids is nice. I obviously like working with kids, but I'm realizing that there's something more in me that I like to explore, that I like to, you know, touch on. I also pinpoint my strengths. I realize my strengths and what I enjoy doing, and I'm also letting them know that, hey, this is where my thinking was taking place at and where I was headed. I wanted to gather some information on how I could contract my services through the school. Okay, and so this through here is just giving them a picture of not only who I am, but some characteristics, right? What I was doing around this time in this year, or what I was thinking about prior to applying for school. So I'm getting ready to transition and go into my story. So this here was just an example. It's trying to break down how I would either use 5 W's or senses, and how you essentially can give them a picture of who you are. Do you guys have any particular questions or some clarification on things?
I don't have any questions, Asia, but I think that that is really awesome. I love how you put the PowerPoint together and it's visual, and students can, you know, see this later on, or parents can share this with their students. They also have a point of reference that they can go back to if they weren't necessarily taking notes right now or when their parents watched it. And then I like how you just broke down your formula and attach the who, what, when, where, and why to each sentence or in your, you know, your own personal statement. Because again, that's where students get lost is how do I grab my reader's attention? How do I even start the sentence off or start the paragraph off? Even your web, that's helpful too, because, you know, finding, like you said, the struggle point where they put the information and they then go all around and figure out more points that make their main topic help support it, and then being able to put that, you know, show an example and put that into the first paragraph, and then that helps them just build upon that. Because once you get that first paragraph started, then it's easy to just write, and then you go back and you start, you know, kind of trimming it up and cleaning things up and taking things out that aren't as important, because you don't want too much fluff and you don't want too much where it's just like, okay, now this is boring, you drug it on. You want to make sure that you're sticking to the point. And so I think this is really good, good feedback, good pointers for students, because even though it's, you know, it's already April, it's still not too late to apply for these scholarships. Yes, it's too late for most universities and colleges. Some have some spring admissions, but it's too late for the most part for them. But there's still scholarships that I've been posting that people are sending me. Every time someone sends it to me, I'll post it to my Facebook page so students can apply, because they have till the 30th to apply. They have till June 1st to apply. So you still need some good tips. And maybe you applied for scholarships in the past, but you didn't have these tips to apply. And now that you have them, maybe you'll start winning some of these scholarships because they chose somebody else because you weren't doing the things that you're showing and pointing out right now.
Right, agreed. And it just goes from, you might, you know, you've had those students, or you as a counselor, you might have seen students that come in maybe with their paper. Because I remember some counselors, they were able to assist students with either just outlining or helping them with their scholarships. You might have seen where a student might say, you know, I love football and I was a leader on the team, but there's no background information. It's like you're, you know, telling a story, and a lot of you can relate. You talk to your friends all the time, right? You might tell them, oh yeah, I went to the mall and I bought this purse. But there are other things that might have happened when you went to the mall, okay? You might have saw someone trip and fall, right, on your way to Macy's, right? And so it's all these details that count, that paint a picture. You're pretty much painting a picture as if someone is there, as if someone has known you for the last few years. So I could have said, I like kids and I enjoy working with them, but I've painted a picture where me adding, okay, who am I talking about, right? What am I talking about? When did this take place? Okay, where was I, you know, while I was going through this transformation or struggle? What was happening around me, right? Why, you know, did I come to this resolution, right, about myself? So it's all those little details. So, and if you are someone that is having some issues writing, putting some things together, just be patient, because it is a step-by-step process, right? Nothing is easily writing a one-page essay for a scholarship. You know, that's just obviously probably not the first thing you're going to submit in. You're going to have to go back, make revisions and review, and it just takes time is all. But hopefully this is just helpful for you as you are applying for those scholarships for writing your personal statement.
Do you know off the top of your head when an application requires you to write a 1,200 page essay, or 1,200 word essay, or 1,500 word essay, what is that in paragraph or in pages? I know sometimes students can get discouraged because they're like, oh, 1,200 words, that is so much, but really it may not be that much.
Honestly, it's not a lot. For the most part, these words, it'll range from 1 to 2 pages. Sometimes depending, it'll say 3. I mean, you could easily type in, like right now on my phone, 1,200 word essay, and it gives you an idea. Oops, 1,200 word essay length, one moment. So 1200 word count will create 2.4 pages single space or 4.8 pages double space. So single space ideally, okay, with your margins and everything in place, 2 pages, 2.5 pages, 2 to 3 pages. So the word count, don't get overwhelmed by the word count. Just simply go to Google, type it in, right? And then it's going to tell you, you'll feel like, oh, okay, just 2 pages, right? Right. They don't have time to, read a 7-page personal statement or scholarship essay, right? They wouldn't do that to students who are applying for some money or turning in their personal statement. Just enough so that you can tell your story and they get to know you.
What would you, what are some, I guess, some pointers that you would say that, not necessarily pointers, what am I trying to say? What are some do's and don'ts when writing an essay besides, the formulas that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen some students do that you're like, oh, this is, I wouldn't put that on my application? Or you saw some, students that, oh, this was really good,
Right.
a good example, besides, yourself and what you put on here.
Right. That's a good question. It's a good point. So what I notice students will do when they're writing, they like to announce when they're either getting ready to start in their paper, or they like to announce what they're getting ready to talk about, or they like to announce when they're done. So for example, at the end, let's say you're closing, and that's all I have to say, things like that. Or I'm going to talk about my such and such, and then you begin to talk about it, right? Again, when you're talking to someone, your friend or a stranger, and you're telling them a story, that's not how you would talk, right? You're not going to tell your friend, okay, I'm getting ready to tell you about how I tripped on my way out to class, right? You're just going to tell them the story about how it happens, right? And thus a reaction usually proceeds after that, whether you're laughing or you just have this picture of that individual doing that. So same thing with writing, right? You're not going to tell the reader what you're getting ready to talk about or let them know that you're finished. When you're writing, we're going to know when you're finished, right? Just like you read a book, you know when the chapter is over, right? You know when the chapter is the beginning in a book, so you don't need to state exactly when you're going to start and when you're ending. Another one that sticks out to me is, it's a good question. Sometimes spelling errors, right? So they'll send me the paper and they want me to look at it because they were considering about turning it in, but it's like, okay, I'm glad you sent it to me to get to look at it because I see errors, and these are just common errors. If you're naming somebody, you might have someone's name might be lowercase, right? Or you might have run-on sentences. You might forget certain punctuation. So Grammarly is a really good tool to check your essays or your personal statements. And also, of course, you have teachers and counselors will be more than happy to overlook that information for you, right? I'm sure you have a neighbor English teacher that also wouldn't mind giving his or her second or third opinion on your paper, just to make sure, your errors are correct. Because essentially, when you turn in something and it has errors, you're saying that you're careless, right? Or you didn't care enough to look over your work. And so that's a reflective of your personality. Maybe your story is good, but when you have either a lot of errors or maybe you didn't follow instructions in the prompt, you're pretty much letting people know, so far as your personality, that you might not care or that you're careless, if that makes sense. You may be someone that does care, but it's just, again, they don't know you, they haven't met you, and looking at that you just give off that impression.
Got it. How would you, or what type of keywords or key phrases would you suggest for a student to finish their essay strongly? Like, instead of saying in conclusion, or I'm going to finish now, or, now I'm going to end my in my essay, like you're saying, you don't want to announce what you're going to do. What would be some key ways to end strongly and kind of tie everything back up? Because I know that the last paragraph is pretty much a summary of what all you said, but you don't necessarily repeat everything that you said. You kind of want to summarize it.
Right. A good question. So for summaries, I like to tell the students that, let me see, for that paragraph, it's almost like you're focusing that paragraph on either that particular scholarship or that particular school. Why would this school or this scholarship be very important to you? It's like you're tailoring that paragraph to that specific school, or you're tailoring that paragraph to that specific scholarship board or committee. The university of such and such would be advantageous to my endeavors because, right, let's say you already know your major, right, and you obviously probably looked at the school, so I would assume that you've probably looked at the faculty there, right? And usually when you go on universities or colleges sites, not only do you see pictures of faculty, but you see their CV. There's a brief introduction of who they are, right? What they specialize in, what they're focused in. And oftentimes what you can do is click on the information and you're able to read a few things that interest you, or that might that coincides with your interests or what you would like to pursue at a university or college, right? So what that does, you're starting to have a better idea, or you have a better understanding of who this professor is, right? So in that paragraph, you're simply stating, maybe certain professors, for example, that you might want to work with because they discuss or talk about X, Y, and Z that you're interested in. And to me, that lets colleges and universities know, for example, that you're attentive, right? That you took the time out to not only just research a school, but you've researched our, exceptional faculty. You took the time to see, how they can benefit you, and who you would like to work with to, expound on those interests, or expound on that career field. So that's the number one thing that I recommend, or I like to tell students is, hey, take a look and use that into your advantage. Just take some time. And you'd be surprised. And quite frankly, you'd be surprised when you go to the university, you might actually work with that particular professor in your field. You might take that class, you guys build that relationship. Oftentimes they also have their contact information if you like to email them and chat with them. And they're usually they're open and talking with you, especially if you're considering going to that university and in that major. So they would probably look forward to working with you.
And that also works, since we're talking about scholarships too, that also works like maybe looking up the history of the scholarship and looking up the committee members or the board members and finding out what they do and trying to find a common ground with them in how you finish that essay.
Exactly.
Like history of the scholarship and how long it's been around, and what they, what other students have used it for, what maybe the founder of the scholarship did, and maybe you can relate to that person if they are a nurse and your major is in nursing. Well, you want to continue what they started, continue their research, or continue their legacy and stuff.
Exactly, because again, it shows so much initiative on your part. You went out of your way to, you're researching, you're digging up information and facts on this scholarship, who's on the board. You're building those connections and you're letting people know, like, hey, I'd be great for this. Okay, this is my goal here, in connecting with X, Y, and Z. And that's an advantage. I don't see why, one would not want to do that. Definitely, it would take, I'm not saying it would take, weeks or months or anything like that, but taking just some time out to do that research, so you're better positioned, right? So you're catching their attention. That would, and generally speaking, people like to know that you're interested in them. Generally speaking, a stranger, a student in your classroom, it's human nature for people to be wanted. It's human nature for people to, want to be liked, to just show interest. And so again, you're doing that in that paper, so that says a lot.
Anything that a student shouldn't talk about when applying for a scholarship?
So I'd say so making an outline just keeps your thoughts focused, right? So what you don't want is to say something and it might be is unrelated to what you're talking about or what your goal is, because then for someone reading that, I pose the question, well, what do you mean right here? or what does that mean, right? So I'm sure if you've written an essay paper, right, and your teacher has graded it, right, marked it up, and she might have circled it and said, huh, or like, what's this? And he or she might be lost in what you've written, because this part is kind of like, okay, I'm following you, and then when I get to here, I'm like, huh? And then you go back to what you were talking about, and all that is good, but this part is, it's a little foggy here. I'm not sure what you meant by that. So now it poses the question of, okay, did you look over it? Do you know what you're talking about necessarily, right? And as far as I'm concerned, you talking about yourself, you're the expert on yourself, right? This is not a topic that you had to draw in a hat and you're researching and putting a whole bunch of different scholarly essays together and things like that. You're the expert on yourself. So you're presenting yourself as if, hey, this is who I am. I'm telling you my story, and nobody knows your story, and can't nobody tell your story than the way that you can. So that's what they're looking for. So I say, make sure everything is just flowing together. Your paragraphs are, you have your topic sentence, and they're just all flowing together. You don't want to, like in this paragraph, if I'm talking about, me teaching and I go on here, I don't want to go left field and talk about, how I used to want to be, I don't know, like a hairstylist, talk about me being a hairstylist, but I'm not tying it back to my purpose, right? I'm not saying that you can't step out a little bit, as long as you bring it back. So I think my second or third paragraph, I talk about, my dad, passing away, right? And I talked about what that did for me. However, my point or my bottom line, I always brought it back to my point or bottom line, right? So it's like you're having a conversation and you say something, but you're making it a point, right? You just have it circle back around to what is it that you're saying, but not, go off in a tangent and just leave it a little unknown, right? You don't want them to be confused about what you're saying.
Anybody have any questions? These are all really good tips. Is there anything that we can share with you guys? Students, do you guys have any questions? Anything that you're coming across that you're struggling with, that you find difficult when you're writing an essay?
Yeah, actually, I was wondering if you guys have any tips on syntax, because I know I have a tendency when I'm writing personal statements to like repeat like the first sentence, or like if I'm saying I a lot or whatever. So do you have any tips on that?
Okay, so it sounds like you need help with saying exactly what you want to say. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So on scratch feed paper, so there are questions that I like when kids to ask themselves, and you can use who, what, when, where, or why, for example. So if you have a habit of saying I or I this, right? So what are you talking about? Or, I'm sorry, who was asking this question? This is
Trinity.
Trinity. Okay. So, you're talking to yourself. Okay. Well, Trinity, what am I trying to say? What am I talking about? Say it, write exactly what you're talking about. Like, say it. If it's a feeling, like, what am I talking about? Right. Or your senses, what am I feeling? Write that word on that paper. Right. What do I want? Right. And you're going through these questions, asking yourself these why questions, the what questions, okay, the where questions. When you write it on paper, look at those things that you wrote on paper, and then look at the sentence that you wrote. But when you compare the sentence that you wrote to the things that you wrote on paper, are you seeing those words that you wrote in your sentence? And if not, right, you can use those words to formulate your sentence and what you're trying to say. Because sometimes it can be difficult to put what's in your head on paper, but sometimes just take a moment and just ask yourself these questions to write out exactly what is that you're feeling, or how, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, where did this take place, and you'll be surprised that you can actually write it or say what it is that you want to say in your paper. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. It's a good question. Thank you. Do you have any more questions?
I don't.
Okay, Olivia, is it Shanice? If you don't necessarily want to say it out loud, you can click the chat button and type in your question here, then we can, see it if you don't want to say it.
Yeah. I just couldn't find the unmute button, but what I was thinking, because I haven't started writing any yet, but I'm slowly like starting with the whole process of like SATs and such. So one thing I was kind of thinking about is, I know I tend to like run on when I'm trying to explain stuff. So I still like, what really is like the most important thing, I guess, that should go into your essay? Because I know like you can't put your whole story in the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You still want to present yourself in a way where they're like, oh, they kind of see the full picture. So what are like maybe some main points that I know that I should try to put in, or like a main idea?
Okay. So while you're writing, did you choose one topic, or how did you start writing? Did you just kind of flat out start just talking about yourself, or did you kind of think about what did you want to touch on or pinpoint on? Did you decide to choose like a particular memory you wanted to focus on, a particular transition that took place in your life, or how did you approach that?
So I haven't started yet. I guess that's kind of why I asked the question, but
Her connection got frozen.
Okay, I was like,
Shanice, are you there? Do you need to log back in? Oh, there you are.
Sorry. Did you hear my question or no?
No,
you hear what you said.
I haven't started yet, but I guess my question would kind of be like, how do I start out? Like, should I start with a memory, or should I start with specifically saying like what my major is, or is there like kind of an initial approach that'll start everything up?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. You can choose a particular. Memories, I find memories to be simpler, easier, because you obviously remember them. Something that kind of ignited some sort of excitement, or something that was painstaking, you usually obviously remember those in detail, right? You can remember how you felt, where you were, right? Who was around, right? And those memories, they tend to stick with you or last with you over time. So as you grow, your outlook and opinions on those, they'll start to develop too. So I would choose a particular memory, right? And then I would use that web to brainstorm things that come to mind with that memory. Now, obviously, if you're applying for the scholarship, they might ask you a particular question where you can weave that story into that particular question, right? Usually, they might ask in terms of your life and about who you are, and you choosing that story to paint that picture for them so they have a better understanding who you are. So I would focus on that memory and just jot down things that come to mind first, right? And as you're writing them down, more things that just start kind of flowing, you kind of work from there. Did you have like another question about that?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Shanice, are you a junior or a senior?
Junior.
Junior. Something else that a friend just recently told me to do for my own daughter, who's a freshman, was she said to start writing writing a journal.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it's time to write your personal insight questions, when you're applying for college, you already have your stories kind of in your journal. You have something to take from that already. And so I started telling my daughter, I was like, just start writing your story, writing stuff every day that, things that stick out, not like I woke up this morning and then I didn't.
Yeah.
Not something like that.
Yeah.
If something, like clearly right now, you could literally write, a huge story about how you're dealing with the fact that we're on this shelter in place. You can't go to school.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised how many students are going to probably use this as an example or one of their personal insight questions.
There's a lot,
in
right?
this next school year. But just writing other stuff, I'm sure there's certain students that are like losing family members while this is going on. And so how did you handle that and deal with that struggle? But I thought that was a really good idea for students to just already start writing their story. So by the time you get to that, you could just go back through your journal and already have something to talk about. Versus when you get to that point, I I don't know. I personally don't even like talking about myself. So I wouldn't know where to start. So I would be in your same, in the student's same shoes. But if I already had those things in place, then it would be a lot easier for me. It would already kind of be your outline, and you just kind of copy and paste
Right.
some of that stuff and already have a story.
That's a very good idea. That's a great point. I remember being younger, we had the diaries with the little locket on there. And I mean, I never would have put that idea together, but that's a great idea. I mean, yeah, they even have like online journals that you can sign up for and, type in your thoughts. So that's a great idea.
So there's another question on here. What is the scholarship asking for? I think every scholarship is going to be different. So some scholarships, I've seen some scholarships that don't require an essay at all. They're just, say what's your GPA. But then there's some scholarships that can be pretty detailed. Some scholarships want to know about you. Some scholarships give you a specific question or even like a theme and say, how would you change the world, or how would you change the world with technology, depending on if you're applying for like an engineering scholarship or whatever. They try to tie it around what the degree is that they're sponsoring possibly. So they give you kind of, some ideas and some themes. They often show you what the previous year's themes are and what the winner's scholarship was, scholarship essay was sometimes. And so you're able to read and get feedback and get ideas. But every scholarship is going to be different as far as what they're asking for. A lot of times you will get that question, though, is why do you deserve this? And I mentioned last week in my live, like, you don't want to say, I deserve this because I'm a 4.0 student and I was captain of the team, and you want to be more specific.
And so when I asked that question of what the scholarship was asking for, Shanice was asking, should she give a memory or should she give something else? And I was saying, you have to focus on what the scholarship is asking for.
Oh, sorry, I misread that question.
No, it's all good. I just wanted to clarify a little bit.
Okay. When you have, as what Maya was saying, how do you want to change the world, for example, or what would you do with the money, or, why do you deserve X, Y, and Z? The good thing about these questions, maybe even the majority of these questions, is that you fall back on yourself, your own story, your personality, and who you are. Because everyone can't simply say, as Maya stated, captain of the cheer team, I have a 4.0 GPA. Other people that are applying for these scholarships also have good GPAs. They've also took part in other activities. They've also had other accomplishments. But what sets you apart is your story. So, you choose by you choosing a memory or just outlining how you want to get your story across, the things that you want to say, it sets you apart, not more so your GPA or the basic scholarship requirements, because obviously all the people who are applying have those basic scholarship requirements. So it's definitely your story is what is going to help you answer that question, because again, they want to know who you are.
Hi, I'm Michaela. I am the president of the LP Football Program.
Sharina, are you guys talking? I saw you unmuted, but I can't hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Here, let me move it closer to her.
I saw her mouth moving, but I didn't know it was
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm the president of the GOAT program. I want to invite everybody here today to the GOAT program. That's going to start at 1.
Yeah.
And I have gotten into 75 schools with over $900,000 in academic scholarships.
Awesome.
And I did this by targeting my hardships, make me look better.
The overcome.
Yes, the overcome.
So like if you can't do, like you were saying, everybody has like good things. And sometimes the bigger, like she has a perfect GPA and she's been in college classes, but a lot of people have perfect GPAs and have taken college classes. So for her, we focused most of her essays on her weaknesses. And then we focused on what she did to overcome the weaknesses. And then we threw in those positives.
Right.
to show, yeah, I did all this, but it wasn't easy. And that's kind of what made her stand out, especially for the schools that on paper she kind of had no business getting into. But they accepted her because the hardship story, and they gave her scholarships because the hardship story is so important to understand, like, this is a journey, and I didn't start off, impeccable.
Right. Okay.
I have a question. So a friend of mine, her daughter is a senior this year, and she was struggling because she didn't have any hardships. She didn't have anything really to talk about that was, to really add to her story, to really set her apart. And so what would you suggest for a student that doesn't, that kind of has had everything, pretty easy, and not had any difficulties growing up or whatever? And
aren't always like what you think they are. Like, in theory, like, Michaela comes from a 2-parent household, we grew up in Elk Grove, things are pretty great, but like, she had difficulty reading when she was really young. So that happened late for her. She doesn't really like people. So for her, saying, I'm serving as president of the Black Youth Leadership Ambassador Program, even though I'm an extreme introvert, because I want to give back to my community. That's like, that. And then, she has a sibling who has difficulties because, her brother is severely on spectrum. So being a part of his community is also a hardship for her, because special needs siblings give a lot. So really, it's just about a self-analysis, because we look so much and we're told so much to always look at the positive, that when we overcome things, we don't give ourselves credit for overcoming them.
Absolutely.
So everyone's had to overcome something. So it's just really important to acknowledge that, like, I went through this and I made it, and other people didn't make it. And especially when you come from Black families of privilege, where it's like, oh, you're supposed to do this. We really don't see what we overcome, because it's like, look, this is my job. Like, for example, I didn't know college was an option till I was in college. And I was like, wait a minute, you didn't have to come. I thought you had to go to college to be a grown-up. So it's kind of one of those, ongoing processes. And then the thing that you said about the having a journal, we give all of our kids planners that have a journal built in, so that when they're doing their daily planning, they can do their daily gratitude and their daily struggles in one place. So that is an amazing, amazing idea. Having a planner, just because having a place to kind of dump your thoughts is huge.
Yeah. I think also some students, as they're enrolling, they're not thinking in terms of, well, the college essentially is, I'm the college's investment. So yeah, you may be paying either the money to attend there, but they want you to stay here. So in the event that you are going to be experiencing some hardships, essentially, what is it within you that can withstand that to, finish your degree here, that, you can be a part of our community or family here. So in your story, you're showing your tenacity, your perseverance, your grit, your creativity, whatever that is that, could be beneficial to the university.
Anybody have any more questions or anything they want to say before we finish off?
Unmute yourself, honey. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Olivia, were you talking?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so right now it's hard to get in contact with teachers because of like coronavirus, and those scholarships are asking for letters of rec. So how do you, what's your advice on that?
Good question.
If you write it for me and send it to me, I will put it on letterhead and send it right back.
What was that?
If you write it and send it to me, I will put it on Black Youth Leadership Project letterhead and send it right back to you.
Like send the scholarship to you?
No. We'll send you a letter of recommendation.
Write your own letter of recommendation and then send it to Miss Lorene, and she'll put it on the letterhead and send it back to you.
So it's lpryor@bylp.com.
What was it?
L Pryor.
I'll put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Also, for those of you who are not seniors, do make sure that you are getting your letters of recommendation for next year now. Like, those should have been done, because for your teachers, even if we were in school and on regular school mode, this is the most hectic time of the year for your teachers. They're getting ready for seniors, graduation, grades. They don't have time to write you a letter in April. So for future reference, you should have your letters for anyone who's graduating in 2021. You should have all of those letters in pocket by the end of June at the latest, but you should have put in the request for your teachers in February, March to make sure you have them in time for the next year's school cycle. Because the first cycle of college tours and college recruitment and college fairs starts in August. So you don't want to ask your teachers in August why they're trying to get their classrooms started, because they may or may not have time to get it done.
And to piggyback on what you're saying, also, most of your school counselors should have something called a brag sheet, where you fill out the sheet and you put down all of your information about you, what extracurricular activities you're doing, what community service you do outside of school, if you're an athlete, classes you're taking, if you're taking anything, if you're taking college classes outside of school, and then you turn that into your teachers so that they can write a really detailed letter about you, and they're not just writing letters based off of what they know about you from just being in their class, because sometimes they're going to say, well, what do you do? So your counselors should have a brag sheet. If not, you can probably Google one, or I can get one to you. You can also reach out to your counselor, Olivia. If you need more than one letter of rec, you can reach out to your school counselor. They should be able to get you a letter. If you've done any community service, if you go to church and you do anything at your church, you can get a letter of recommendation from just pretty much any adult that you've worked with. It just doesn't have to be letters of rec from a teacher.
And we've found that the non-teacher, non-counselor recommendations are the most valuable.
Yes.
Because your teachers kind of are supposed to write them, so are your counselors. They're all required, so almost everyone has them. But if you have a really strong community service log, you can be partnered with those letters. Those are the ones that are often, if everyone doesn't have them.
It also shows that you are not just that you're working in the community or you're giving back. So that you are that you're working with someone like a pastor or something, and they can speak to your character. And like Sharina was saying, it's not just from your teacher who automatically knows you because they're in their class. Those are a really good question, Olivia. Anybody else? All right, well, I would like to definitely thank Sharina and Lane for allowing us to host this live Zoom chat.
Yes, thank you.
All these tips and give feedback to students. We're going to post this on our personal pages and for people to share. Definitely for everybody. If you guys have any questions, just reach out to me.